So in this video, we're going to take a look at building a Tailwind combo box using Rails. We're going to use ViewComponent and Hotwire. So this is the combo box component we're looking at building, and we're going to simplify it slightly. So in the Tailwind example, you can click in and type to filter the list. We're just going to make it more like a fancy select field, so you can still just select one example at a time. I've set up a Rails app, and this is the command I've used to set it up. So we're using Tailwind CSS, and we're going to use ES-build for the JavaScript. But other than that, it's a fairly standard Rails app. I've also set up a people model that has a name and image URL for an avatar and some seeds. So this will create all of the people and set up an image URL for them, and those images are just inside the Rails app at the moment. So the first thing we're going to do is install ViewComponent. So if I go over here and let's see, guide, getting started, and we'll just take the name of the gem here and go through and do bundle add ViewComponent. And I think there's an installer to use, or maybe we just generate a new component. So if we say, let's call a component fancy select. And so that's created our component for us and a HTML file for it. So the other thing we need to do here, because this is a fresh Rails app, we need to generate a controller. So I'm just going to say controller is called pages, and let's say there's a home page, and that'll just give us a view that we can go in and start playing about with this select field. So we'll open up our roots and just change this to root 2, and then we'll make it pages home like this. And now if I go in and restart this Rails server, we should be able to go and this should be pages, I think. Yep, there we go. So now let's get our fancy select field rendering on the page. So we'll go through here. Let's just get rid of this and go into our home page. Let's create a div and say class padding y 16 max width, and let's just go through max width 2XL, let's say, and then give it some margin so it centers, and let's see what that looks like. So is this not working? Oh, I think what I need to do is, instead of running the normal Rails server, I think I need to run bin dev so that it runs the Tailwind process there as well. Now if I reload, we can see that that content is in the middle. And now let's just try rendering our fancy select component. So we'll say render fancy select .new and reload. Now we get uninitialized constant fancy select. That's because it's fancy select component. I'm determined to make all the mistakes in this video. Okay, so we've got our fancy select component now. What we want to do is take this example from Tailwind. So we'll just go ahead, copy the code, and go to our fancy select component, paste this in, and let's reload. And so this is not loading. Does it require plugins? Yeah, so we need Tailwind CSS forms. So let's go here and do yarn add Tailwind CSS forms, and then open up our Tailwind config, and let's say plugins, and let's restart this again. So that changes it slightly, but we're still not getting, oh, I know what we need to do. So in our Tailwind config, we need to allow this to work with ViewComponent. So we need to say app components .html.arb and app components.rb to tell Tailwind to look in the components folders for styles too. So there we go. So now what we want to do is get our data going into this, and to do that we want to let our component take some parameters. So if we go to our component here and create an initializer, and what we want to take here is a label, items, which will be an array, and let's start with that and see. So we'll assign these to instance variables, and we'll also make adder readers for them. And now what we can do is go back to our home and pass these in. So we can go here and say label is choose a person. And now we can go to the fancy select component. We'll get rid of this comment, and now we can put a label in here. So let's just go in and say label, and now if we refresh that, our label's coming in correctly. So the next thing then we want to do is pass data into this, and to make this as reusable as possible, you don't want to pass in the person model, because you might want to pass in organizations or some other type of data in the future. So we want to create our own data structure here. To do that, let's go in here and say class item, and we'll say inherits from struct.new, and we'll give that an ID, a label, and an image URL. And we'll just save that. So now we should have this fancy select component item, which we can call .new on, and give it an ID, a label, and an image URL. And then we're always passing data to this component in a format that it expects and knows how to handle. So let's go to our controller. So let's go to pages controller, and for our home page here we'll say at items equals, and we'll say person dot all, and then we'll call dot map on that, and map will let us just loop over these and convert them then. So we need to do there. So now we'll say fancy select component item.new, and then we'll say person.id, person.name, and person.image URL. And then we can take this items component and go into our home page and pass in items as at items. Now if we reload this, it doesn't do anything because we're not looping over those items yet, but if we take a look at doing that now, we should be able to get our data in place. So now I want to go in here to our template, and we'll just say items.each do, and then item. And then we can come down here and end that loop. And just get rid of some of these things here. So now we've got a list item for each person. So if we hit save and reload this, we should now have 9 items in the list, which is good. Let's go through and see if we can get the content changed across now. So we can now go here and say item.label. Let's reload. So that's working. We'll want their IDs in here. So we'll say data ID equals, and then item.id. And that's something that we're going to use in our JavaScript in a moment. So the last thing then is we want an image tag. So we'll say image underscore tag, and then we'll say item.image URL, and add a class on here, and just copy this across. And the other thing we want to do is have an alt tag, and we'll just make that item.label. And now if we reload, we've got all of our images coming through, which is great. Now with Tailwind, at the moment, none of the behavior is linked up here. So we need to implement that ourselves using stimulus and make this all work. So the first thing I'm going to do is this input here that you can type into. I don't really want that. I just want to select one item at a time. So in here, I'm just going to make it a placeholder. So we'll just say like pick one or something like that. So we'll just take this input out, and we'll put in a div, and just copy the styling of it. We won't need any of these focus states because we're just going to be displaying text in this, not actually selectable. So we'll go in here and then just say pick one, or pick an item. Now if we reload that, we've just got that as placeholder text, which is good. Now we'll go ahead and create a stimulus controller for this. So in stimulus here, we'll see there's a helper to generate a controller. So we'll go in here and generate a controller called fancy select. And then we've got our controller here. So we'll take this data controller, fancy select, and we'll just add this to the very top of our fancy select component and save that. Then we're going to want to create some targets. So the first kind of target we're going to want here is this item, and we'll call this data fancy select target, and we'll call it selected for the selected item. Then we can go down here and create a target for the list, and we can use that to hide and show the list items. Then our button, we're going to want that to be a data action, and we'll say fancy select toggle to toggle opening and closing the list. And then the last thing we'll do is add a hidden class to our list for now. So if we go and reload this, the list is hidden, which is what we want. And then we want to click the button to toggle hiding and showing. So we'll do that first and just go in here and say toggle. And also we need to list our targets. So we need static targets. which is an array, and we have the list, the selected item for now, I think. We can go here and say this dot list target dot class list dot contains, and we can say if it contains a class of hidden, then we want to show it. So we can go in and then say this dot open, and then otherwise we'll say this dot close. And so for open, we can go through and say this dot list target dot class list dot add or dot remove hidden. And then for close, we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to add the class of hidden. So let's see if that is working. And it is. We probably want to extend that all the way out. So even if I click pick an item, it's going to toggle. So let's go back here and see this button. And so we've got inset Y0. So I wonder if we do width full. That works, but the icon's in the wrong place. Maybe we do flex row reverse. Yep, perfect. So now that works. The next thing that we want to look at is hover states on these, and then when you click an item, what happens. So I think Tailwind's leaving this all up to ourselves. So it's saying manage highlight styles based on mouse enter, mouse leave, and keyboard navigation. I'm definitely not doing keyboard navigation. That was going to be way too long for a video. So there's the active styles and not active styles. Let's just do those on Tailwind hover. So we can say hover text white, hover BG indigo 600, and not active is text gray, which it has already, so that's fine. Let's reload, and that's looking good. The check mark will need sorted, so check mark. So the next thing we want to do is then make the list item a group. So we can say group, and then we can say in here group hover text white, and reload. That's perfect. Then we need to mark this as hidden until we actually select an item. So let's go in and just do hidden. And that's fine. And now we want to do what happens when you click. So for clicking on these items, we're going to come in here and say choose, which will take an event. And for now we'll set what do we need? Let's say selected item is e.current target, and then we'll even just log out what that selected item is. And now if we go in here and we'll say data action equals fancy select choose, and we'll go back to the browser. I'm just going to open a console here, and if we click on one of these, currently getting nothing, I think because this is a list item, we need to actually say what type of event it is. So we need to say if it's a click or not. And yeah, that's working. So we've got these coming through now. And what we're going to need is to get the ID as well of the selected element. So const ID equals selected item dot data set dot ID. And let's log that out too. That's working fine, which is good. Next up then, when you actually choose the item, so what we're going to need to do here is copy the label HTML and place it into the outer form element. We're going to need to set the hidden input, which we don't have yet. Set the hidden inputs value to the ID and remove check marks from all other elements, and then add check mark to selected item. So when I'm doing JavaScript and things like this, sometimes I like to just make a list of the behaviors that I want to do and then just go through one by one checking those off. So the first thing we'll do, copy the label HTML. So if we look at the selected item, it's this part here with the label and the image that we want to insert in here where our pick an item part is. So we're going to need something on this, and generally I'll do like data.js equals, and I'll call it label. And this just lets anyone know that it's not a class where we're saying like we're adding this class name for some hidden purpose. It's very obvious that the reason this is here is because we need to select it and pick it out using JavaScript. So a designer won't come along and just remove your class name and then break your code. It's definitely something people aren't going to touch. So that's just a wee pattern that I like to use. So anyway, we've got this selector now. We can go back to our JavaScript and we can say selected item dot query selector, and we can say data.js equals label, and then what we want is the outer HTML, and then what we want is our selected target. So this dot selected target, and what we want to set is its inner HTML, and we want to set it to this. So we can do this reload. When I pick an item, our checkbox now updates, which is great. Next up, set hidden inputs value to ID. So this is something we don't even have yet. So what I actually want up here at the top of this is to have a hidden field tag. And the next thing is, what do we call this? So that's going to need to be another attribute to our component. So I'm going to call that form name. That's going to be a required attribute. And we'll have to go back to our home page then and say form name, and we're just going to call it person ID. Then we can go in here and say the attribute name is form name, and it currently isn't going to have a value. So let's reload this, go and check in on that. And we've got our person ID hidden field with no value. So that's fine. We're going to need to then make this a data fancy select target, and we're going to call it input. Then up here add input, and then we can say this dot input target dot value equals ID. And now let's test this out. So if we find our input here, and actually we've made a mistake. We need to say nil for the value, for the initial value, and then our data attributes. So if we reload this, we've got our hidden input here, person ID, data fancy select target. That's all set up. So now if we click on one of them, you can see the value changing here. So that's working. Now remove check marks from all the other elements. So our check marks are hidden. Let's see how we're going to do this. So we're going to need another data.js equals, and we'll call this check. And it also looks like the currently selected item gets font semi-bold. So we're going to maybe need a data.js here, and we'll call this title. And now what we're going to do is, we've got our list. I think we also want a target for item. And basically every single row is going to be item. So we'll say data fancy select target equals item. And then what we can do is this dot item targets dot for each item target, and then we can say item target dot query selector, and we're looking for data.js title. And what we want to do here is class list dot add hidden, and then we also want to look for data.js check and add the hidden class. Then we want to do similar thing here, but copy these, and we want to take our selected item, and we want to remove the hidden class and remove the actually, is it what we want to do with those titles is actually font semi-bold. So I want to add it in this case and remove it in this case. So let's see how this works. Perfect. The last thing we want to do is when you pick an item, close the checkbox. So we'll just go down here and say this.close. And so now when we pick, it closes automatically as well, and the selected one remains open. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. Obviously you're going to be able to use that as just another component inside your forms, because we have the hidden field tag, and so you can pass in whatever form name you want it to be, include it inside your form width tag or whatever that is, and just have it and use it as another form element. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to go through. There's a bit of Tailwind in there, a bit of ViewComponent, and a bit of Hotwire and Stimulus as well. So I hope that is useful to you. This is something I've done reasonably recently myself as part of a project. And yeah, if you like this content and want to see more, please like and subscribe. And any questions, drop them in the comments below. Cheers.